Hello and welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're so glad you're here with us
We are.
because today we are wrestling with a text that I have to say it really stopped me in my tracks.
Yeah.
It's one of those pieces where you finish reading and you just kind of have to sit there for a minute and stare at the wall.
It absolutely demands a moment of silence. It's a very dense philosophical text. It's titled Transphobia, the difference between begging and being.
And right off the bat, that title sounds incredibly specific. It sounds like we're about to dive into, a really niche debate.
hmm
But what grabbed me, and what I think is going to grab you, is that while the subject is transphobia, the underlying machinery here is about power. It's about who gets permission to just exist in a room.
That is the key. The insights in this piece about identity and gatekeeping and this whole idea of reality enforcement, I mean, they're universally applicable,
Right.
but we have to give credit to the specific context because the text argues that the trans experience just exposes these mechanics in a really raw, really high-stakes way.
So, okay, let's get right into the central thesis. The author is making a pretty bold claim here. They're saying that a huge chunk of what we call transphobia isn't actually about confusion.
Right.
It's not about people not understanding biology or,
Yeah.
being worried about bathrooms.
Yeah, the text posits, like, those are just, they're surface level rationalizations.
Mhm.
The core thesis is much more psychological. It argues that hostility often comes from a reaction to, and I'm quoting here, discomfort with being that does not ask for permission.
Discomfort with being that does not ask for permission. I want to just sit with that for a second.
It's a powerful line.
It implies that for some people, the offense isn't the identity itself.
No.
It's the audacity of having that identity without, filing the proper paperwork first.
Exactly. The text sets up these two contrasting modes of existence to explain it. On one side, you have begging,
Okay.
and on the other, you have being. And the argument is that moving from one to the other is what causes this massive disruption of social power.
Okay, so let's start there. Let's start with begging.
Yeah.
When I first read that word, I was thinking, economically, panhandling.
Sure.
But the text is using this as a psychological term, right? It calls it a posture of perpetual justification.
It's not about money at all. It's about a social dynamic where you are constantly paying a kind of tax just to be present.
A tax.
Yeah. And the text breaks it down into four distinct elements. It says begging happens when you are, 1, explaining your existence, 2, proving your sincerity, 3, performing acceptability, and 4, negotiating for basic dignity.
I really want to break those down because they feel so heavy. Let's take that first one, explaining your existence. Is this just about answering questions? I mean, we all have to explain ourselves sometimes.
Sure, but those are usually conversational. It's existential.
Existential.
Yeah, imagine walking into a room and feeling like your very presence is a riddle that everyone else there is trying to solve. You're not a person, you're a question mark. Explaining your existence in this context means you feel this burden of making your life intelligible to people who just don't have the framework for it. You're constantly teaching a 101 class on your own humanity just to get through lunch.
That sounds completely exhausting. And then the second one, proving your sincerity. This one really hit me because it feels like it's just a phase argument.
It is. It's that demand for consistency over time before you're granted respect. The text suggests that in this begging dynamic, the individual is basically on trial permanently. You have to prove you're not faking it, you're not confused, that you're serious.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second. Isn't some level of scrutiny normal? If I suddenly decide I'm a professional basketball player, people are going to want to see me shoot a hoop.
Well, if you claim a skill, yes.
Yeah.
But we're talking about identity here. If you tell me you're a basketball player and you miss a shot, you're just a bad basketball player. You're not faking your existence. The text argues that for trans people in this begging state, the scrutiny is about whether their internal reality is allowed to be real at all. The stakes are just so much higher.
That makes sense. It's the difference between proving a skill and proving a soul. What about performing acceptability?
This is a huge one. This is the pressure to be the good one.
The palatable one, the one that doesn't make waves.
Exactly. It's that internal calculation of, okay, I need to dress this way, I need to speak this way, I need to be extra patient so I don't scare anyone. It's modulating your entire being so the observer doesn't feel uncomfortable. It's code switching, but dialed up to an existential level.
And that final one, negotiating basic dignity.
This is maybe the most heartbreaking element. It implies that dignity isn't a given, it's not a right, it's a transaction.
The transaction.
It's, if I answer all your intrusive questions politely, then you will use the name I asked you to use.
You're bartering. You're bartering for basic respect. So when you stack all four of those up, explaining, proving, performing, negotiating, you get this posture of perpetual justification. But here's the twist in the text that really surprised me. It says that this dynamic, as painful as it is for the person doing the begging, it actually makes the observer feel safe.
It does,
Yeah.
and this is absolutely critical to understanding the whole thesis. Why would seeing someone beg make you feel safe?
I don't know.
Because it reinforces the hierarchy.
It confirms who the boss is.
It confirms who the gatekeeper is. The text explicitly says, begging reassures the observer that they remain the gatekeeper. As long as you are pleading for my acceptance, you are implicitly agreeing that I have the power to give it to you.
Or to withhold it.
Or to withhold it.
So even if the observer says they're confused or concerned, what's happening subconsciously is that they're actually comfortable. They're comfortable because they're still holding the gavel.
Precisely. The power dynamic is intact. The world still works the way they think it works. You're the anomaly, I'm the norm, and you need my permission to be here.
Which brings us to the disruption. This is where the text moves from begging to being. How does the source define being? Because it sounds, I don't know, a little abstract.
It defines being as existing without asking. It's characterized by a calmness, a coherence, and a total lack of performance. It's the moment you stop filing the paperwork.
So it's not necessarily about doing anything different on the outside. It's more of an internal shift.
It's an internal grounding, yeah. It's moving from an outward-facing orientation, do you believe me, please believe me, to an inward-facing one. I am here.
And the text argues that this is actually more provocative to some observers than the begging.
Yeah.
Which is counterintuitive. You would think, logically, that if someone just quietly went about their business, people would be happy.
You would think they'd say, oh good, they've quieted down. But the text says the opposite happens. It says transphobia often intensifies not when a person asks for too much, but when they are not asking at all.
Why? Why is the silence louder than the argument?
Because it removes the gate. Think about that gatekeeper image again. If you are standing at my gate, banging on it, yelling, let me in. Yeah, I feel important. I'm guarding the fortress. But if you just walk around the gate,
Right.
or if you build your own house outside my gate and just sit on your porch drinking tea,
The gatekeeper looks ridiculous.
they look obsolete. When a person embodies their identity calmly, without pleading, they are effectively telling the observer, I don't need your permission to be real. And that is terrifying to someone who relies on that permission structure to define their own reality.
It feels like ignoring a heckler at a comedy show.
How so?
Well, if you argue with the heckler becomes part of the show. They have power. If you just ignore them, they're just a guy yelling in the dark.
And that loss of control, that realization that their approval is suddenly irrelevant, that's what triggers a very aggressive reaction. The text calls this a loss of authority over reality.
I want to pivot for a second to the internal experience of this, because the text doesn't just treat this like a sociology experiment. It talks about what happens inside the human body when you shift from begging to being.
And this is where it gets into the physiology. The source is clear that begging is a survival state. It's a state of high alert.
Fight, flight, or fawn.
Especially fawn, if you are constantly scanning the room to see if you're safe, to see if you're passing, to see if people are buying your performance, your cortisol levels are through the roof. You are never actually at rest.
So being isn't just a philosophical stance, it's a biological relief.
It's regulation. The text says when someone shifts into being, their nervous system actually regulates, their identity stabilizes, and most importantly, dignity is restored.
Because you aren't trading pieces of yourself for safety anymore.
You're not. There's also a distinction the text makes here about how this changes relationships. It says the interaction moves from being adversarial to relational. Right. An adversarial interaction is debate. Are you valid? Prove it to me. A relational interaction is a connection. Here's my reality. What is yours? It allows for actual human connection because that whole validity question is just off the table.
But I want to pause here because I can hear a listener thinking, okay, but does this mean I can never explain myself? If I'm trans and my grandmother asks a genuine question, am I begging if I answer her.
I'm so glad you brought that up because the text is very, very nuanced on this point. It is not saying explanation is inherently bad. It's not saying you should stonewall your grandmother.
So what's the difference then?
Agency. It's the difference between an invitation and a subpoena.
Ooh, I like that.
The text says explanation can be this beautiful bridge when it's voluntary, when you choose to share yourself because you want to be known. That's powerful.
Versus being demanded to explain yourself just to be tolerated in the room.
Exactly. The harm is in that posture of perpetual justification. If you are answering questions because you feel like you have to in order to avoid punishment or rejection, that's begging. If you're answering because you want to deepen a relationship, that's being.
It goes back to that tax idea you mentioned.
Yeah.
If I give you a gift, it's generous. If you garnish my wages, it's theft.
That is a perfect analogy. And the text emphasizes the goal isn't silence. The goal is freedom from the requirement of speech.
Okay, let's zoom out to the big boss's level of this deep dive. The text wraps up with this massive philosophical idea about authority over reality. We touched on with the gatekeeper, but let's go deeper. The text argues the core conflict isn't even about gender. It's about who gets to define what is real.
This is the classic map versus the territory problem. The observer, let's say, society at large, has a map of how the world works. Men are this way, women are that way, biology works like this. That's the map.
And the map makes them feel safe. It tells them where all the roads are.
Exactly. Then a trans person enters the scene, and they don't fuck the map. Now, the rational response would be, my map must be incomplete. I should probably update it.
But that's not what happens.
No.
Yeah.
The reaction is, you are wrong. You are violating my map. The observer feels that their authority to define what is real is slipping away. If you can exist outside their definitions, then their definitions aren't absolute truth.
They're just opinions.
And people hate having their absolute truths turned into opinions.
They panic.
They panic. And the text argues that begging reassures them that the map is still valid because you're apologizing for not fitting on it. Just existing without apology forces them to confront the fact that the territory is much more complex than their map ever was.
So what's the end game here? If the observer is freaking out because their map is wrong and the person's just trying to exist, how does this resolve? Does the text suggest we just flip the script? The trans person becomes the new gatekeeper?
No, and that's the beauty of it. It's not about domination. It is not about taking the gavel and hitting the other person with it. The resolution it proposes is the normalization of being.
Normalization of being. Break that down for me.
It means reaching a state where existence doesn't require a thesis defense. The text says that when being is allowed without a demand for proof, conflict de-escalates naturally.
Because there's nothing to fight against anymore.
Exactly. Reality, when it's coherent, doesn't need to argue. It just is. The text suggests that the more this state is embodied, the more people refuse to beg and simply are, the less power the gatekeepers have. You can't gatekeep someone who isn't trying to enter your gate.
Right.
You can't win a debate with someone who isn't debating you.
It reminds me of the physics of resistance. If you push against a wall, you exert force. If the wall just vanishes, you just fall over.
That's it. That's what being does. It removes the wall. It just stops the energy exchange of the conflict.
And restores that energy to the individual.
Yes. It reclaims that energy for living instead of just defending.
This has been such a journey. We've gone from this exhausting checklist of begging, the explaining, the proving, the performing, all the way to the quiet disruption of being. And we've seen how this isn't just about a specific identity. It's really about the mechanics of dignity itself.
It really is. It reframes this hostility not just as hatred, but as a crisis of control for the observer. And it reframes the solution not as winning an argument, but as refusing to participate in the trial in the first place.
The line from the text that I think will stick with me forever is the one you mentioned earlier. Being does not argue. It simply remains.
It's a profound statement. It simply remains.
So before we wrap up, we always like to leave you with a little bit of homework or at least a thought to chew on. We've talked a lot about the trans experience today because that is the subject of the text. But this mechanism, this begging for permission to exist, it shows up in so many human experiences.
It really does. Imposter syndrome, abusive relationships, toxic workplaces, anywhere you feel like you have to constantly earn your seat at the table.
So here's my question for you, listening right now. In what area of your life are you currently performing acceptability? Where are you explaining and justifying yourself to a gatekeeper who has already decided not to let you in? And what would happen if you just stopped asking and started being?
It's a scary thought. but it might just be the path to freedom.
Thank you so much for diving deep with us today. This was a heavy one, but a really good one.
It was a pleasure as
We'll
always.
see you next time.